we have the opportunity to rebuild the entire internet on top of Nostr.
The goal is to have the entire podcasting industry adopt Nostr.
Eventually, I'm confident that everything will move over to Nostr.
There's far more use cases than we could conceive of.
You invent something, my shit gets better. I invent something, your shit gets better. That is insane.
The addressable market is basically the whole world.
This is the thing that we're going to use to take down big tech and these centralized institutions. This is it.
Nostr is rising. For those who haven't listened to Bitcoin.review before, I'm NVK. I run CoinKite, where we've been making Bitcoin security products and fund devices since the very early days of Bitcoin. Nostr is a new protocol, and like any new technology, it's very hard for people to understand the why, the what, and the how. We are going to be talking to the people who actually build the things and try to explain to people what and why we're doing this. The show is not sponsored. We are supported by your Zaps and my company CoinKite. You can follow all the Nostr Rising episodes on nostrrising.com. Thank you so much for the support. Hello, and welcome back to the Bitcoin.review Nostr Rising series. Today, we'll be talking about Nostr funding, monetizing, and other things money-related. With me today, I have Miss Lyn Alden.
Happy to be here.
Mr. Odell.
It's a pleasure as always.
And Max.
What's up, guys?
I think you guys all have very unique voices and are known enough that we probably don't need some big introduction. So if you don't know who they are, read the show notes. Classic. So guys, first of all, I guess, we're early in Nostr, right? Like it's very, very, very early. And, people are not going to find monetization yet in any reasonable way to sort of run a company, maybe independently, and or be able to build, like a successful startup yet, right? They're going to be starting to build now. What should people be sort of like expecting now in terms of finding funding from VCs, finding funding from grants, or trying to maybe sell their stuff on Nostr, like through Zaps or through gift wraps or things like that. Who wants to give their sort of like their short-term outlook first?
I'm happy to hop in. I think you're absolutely right that we're just a couple years into this experiment, and I don't expect to see huge revenue streams in the super near-term future, although never say never, right? You never know what happens if we get some kind of a bull market taking off. So I think one thing that's really important is for, builders to think about long-term. Something that I love, I know the grants that Odell and FuSats OpenSats, other groups have been giving it. Yeah, I think that's absolutely awesome. And that's an amazing way to get started and, explore an area. For me, when I typically come in as an investor, as a small fund, I like to come in, a few hundred K, super, super early stage. But I view myself as maybe just one step beyond sort of the grant funding, in that I'm typically funding builders, people that I think, ship super fast, have great taste, and are exploring an interesting area that could become a huge market. But I also, have full honesty with myself. We don't know what Nostr's killer use case is. We don't know what the killer business models are. We have ideas. I have ideas. Founders have ideas. But I'm typically betting on people that I think are going to be able to explore a good area and find that. And I think part of the name of the game is you have to be in the water to catch the wave. And so one thing I love in founders is you got a cockroach mode for a while, right? If you're raising money right now or you're getting a grant, you need to be able to stay in the water for the next at least couple of years. If something pops faster with the bull market, great. Then you're going to be, thoroughly surprised. Having said all of that, it is kind of, I think, a little bit like, in the early days of Bitcoin, those companies that were building, for a long time, there was crickets. But when you were in the wave, when you were in the water, when the wave starts to swell, then, you're obviously going to be very happy. So for me, one thing that I'm looking at in this stage, since it's been a bit of a prolonged bear market, are these founders that are exploring a business model which at scale could become a venture backable company. And by that, I mean, we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue a year at least. And do they have the sort of cockroach mode ability that they can last if it takes 2 years or whatever for us to start to see some of those numbers come in?
Awesome. I'll jump in next. First of all, I'm a little bit unique on this call because I wear two hats, right? So I'm the co-founder of OpenSats. We provide grants to open source contributors. And for what it's worth to the listeners, we have a 9-person board, and NVK is one of our most valuable board members. He provides a lot of experience and feedback to all of our grant recipients and all the applications. We get tons of applications. We got almost 1,000 applications this year across Bitcoin and Nostr.
It's a lot of money that goes through.
And then also I'm a managing partner at 1031, a venture fund, one of the largest venture funds that operates in the Bitcoin space. And we do have one investment in Nostr. So I kind of see a lot of these projects from both sides. First of all, I'm glad that we have the amount of donations that we're able to give out on the Nostr side and the Bitcoin side from OpenSats. That's where most of the funding in the space is coming from right now. I think it's important to realize, most of my experience is on the Bitcoin side. And I see a lot of similarities with Nostr as with Bitcoin, which is why, Nostr right now is being heavily bootstrapped by Bitcoiners. I don't think that's a unique perspective. I think with both Bitcoin and Nostr, like the addressable market, the total TAM for these projects is basically the whole world. Everyone needs to use money. And if you look at something like Facebook user numbers are basically capped by birth rates. Like they have, they have like 6 billion people that are using their products. And the only thing stopping their growth is more people being born. So I think Nostr can be very similar there. But one of the things we see in Bitcoin is the most investable companies in the Bitcoin space are basically KYC, buy, sell, regulated businesses that are able to charge, basis points. They're able to charge fees on buying and selling Bitcoin. Everything else is much more difficult. And why is that? That's because if you're operating in a project that is based off an open source foundation, right? Like it's based off of open source code that can be forked, that is working in an open protocol, you don't have the liberty of a lot of the moats that we see with most modern tech businesses. And so Nostr is going to have this same issue. Now, that being said, there are still many ways that you can monetize in a open, ethical fashion. And I think we're starting to see a lot of them pop up in Bitcoin, and we're going to see that kind of pass over to Nostr. And one example I would give is a company like mempool.space. Now, mempool.space has had a slower growth trajectory than these types of KYC regulated businesses that have inherent moats in terms of their banking connections and the KYC friction of user growth, of like user walled gardens. But like mempool.space is a open source project. You can run it yourself. Like literally their users could stop using their product for self-hosting their own project that they maintain. But they have two pieces there. They have this transaction accelerator that relies on their mining relationships. So there's an inherent moat there. There's an inherent competitive advantage where if you want your transaction accelerated, you have to go through the main mempool.space hosted instance. You can't just use a self-hosted instance to do that. And the second thing is Wiz has trademarked his brand. And I think a lot of people do not realize the value of a brand and reputation. As long as you're not just straight up taking advantage of your customers, I think in the Nostr space, what we will see is brands emerge that do have good reputation, that do have long-term proof of work shown in the space, and users will use them as opposed to something that might be a little bit cheaper. I was just talking to Vitter about this with Amethyst. And like, if Amethyst offers something as simple as media uploads, a lot of his users, I think, would pay him to do media uploads through him rather than through 10 other different services that could upload media, just because they've been using his client for 5 years and they enjoy it. So I think there's a lot of value in the brand. And to go back to the mempool space example, Wiz's project is open source, but he's trademarked the brand. You can't just go and launch a monetized service that has mempool as the brand. So I think that's an interesting aspect that people should be thinking about.
Lyn.
Yeah, I view it similarly. And I also approach this both from a venture side and also where I can helping with grants, either to organizations that give grants or in some cases smaller direct grants. And I think that because of the early stage of where a lot of this is, it's obviously still very grant based. And the VC rounds that I'm aware of in the space or that we've participated in some capacity tend to be that very small level just because of the exploratory nature of where the whole space is now. I do think, like, Matt said, that there are clear areas where moats should be possible or that monetization should be possible. So I do view it as a space that could become more venture oriented over time when the user numbers are bigger and when some of the business models start to solidify. Obviously, in small amounts, it's already venture capable, but I think it has to still just grow into, a little bit bigger ecosystem. And I approach this with a lot of patience. I see some people saying that Nostr is not growing big enough or that it's kind of, maybe spinning its wheels in place. But I think when you're going against really big network effects and you're trying to build really big network effects, either the protocol level or the platform on top of the protocol, it takes time. It's not really like, it doesn't get made in a year or 2 years. Early stages of Bitcoin went through similar, a lot of things take longer than people expect just because you see something and you think, why doesn't everyone see this? It takes a lot of time and there's a lot of power incumbents. But I do like where it's headed. And now we're even seeing some crowdsource funding as well, like on Geyser, for example. Whether it's not even just development, it's also marketing, telling people what Nostr is, for example, and showing them how to use it. So I'm pretty optimistic.
Yeah, it's funny, right? It's very easy to draw a parallel between sort of like Bitcoin and Nostr, similar sort of goals. In the early days of Bitcoin, everybody started making a block explorer. In the early days of Nostr, everybody makes a Twitter clone. And then the second round of whatever the thing was, everybody makes a wallet, everybody makes, a client that does X thing, right? We were making Bitcoin debit cards in 2014. We had a bunch deployed, but then at the same time, it's like, but there isn't enough people in it.
Who wants this?
Seriously, it's like 140 countries with like the little Bitcoin terminals that we made with the cards, and there is traffic, but it's like you can't scale a business on that, right? But I think what happens is because it's so real and it is such like an open, good network, a network graph. The technology is good. The people immersed in it start getting like uneasy and sort of anxious, right? It's very easy to feel that way because, we use it every day. Like I'm using it more than I use Twitter. And it feels like, okay, so like I'm here all the time. Like, why can't I have everybody else here? Why can't I monetize it now? Right. But it's just too early. It takes years. I mean, like it's a miracle that Bitcoin has $1 trillion market cap in 15 years. Like an absolute miracle. Why? Because, the technology is 1,000 times better, more efficient in any aspect than fiat, right? So you have this curve of trying to get the adoption. You have this curve of trying to build the technology in a way that is not just for early adopters, right? Because it's still very hard to use. Well, I mean, it's easy for us. It's easy if you use, I don't know, like Prime or somebody press the button, but like, it's not quite there, right? It's still sort of, there's a lot of friction. And I think as the time passes, people will find a way. It has that vibe of it's inevitable, right? Like regardless, open sats, we can accelerate things, early VCs can accelerate things a bit, but it has that inevitability sort of vibe because there is nothing else that is 100 times better in the market right now.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, there's compared to early Bitcoin versus early Nostr, right? I think there's two things Nostr has going for it in terms of adoption. First of all, I mean, I think the fact that Bitcoin already exists, right? Like the idea of zaps is revolutionary in itself, and I think could become a decent source of direct donation revenue from individuals. Now, it isn't yet, and don't build expecting donations from zaps to be meaningful in any way.
I mean, I totally disagree on the zaps as value for value, but it's fun.
I mean, look, it exists, and open source contributors now can receive donations directly from their users without permission, without any middlemen, and with a social signal, right? Where we can all try and one up each other and be the biggest donator. And that social signal, it works decently well at boosting donations. But like I said, very early.
Is that your strategy, Matt? Taking all those top zaps?
Of course, I want every top zap. It's important for me to put my nuts on the table. The second piece is the open sats. Like we found great success with open sats, and the fact that we're sending out $500,000 worth of Bitcoin a month to open source Nostr devs this early in Nostr development, there wasn't that kind of support in the early days of Bitcoin. And then the last piece is Our society has a social media problem. We're like glued to our phones. Like everyone is like constantly glued to their phones. There is a viral element of a social protocol versus a money that I could actually see Nostr accelerating past Bitcoin adoption and then speeding up Bitcoin adoption after the fact. Because we've seen it happen time and time again with stuff like a TikTok or a Snapchat that comes out, or a Clubhouse. I mean, Clubhouse is a flash in the pan, but still, it came out of nowhere and then all of a sudden had a ton of users because social is inherently viral.
Yeah, I can totally see that. I mean, like, paying somebody, like commerce, right? Like, commerce is not just the money, right? It's the coordination. Like, you can't interact with anybody until you have a way to discover them, discover their bid, and discover and ask, right? So Nostr provides that. It's just, we're still stuck on the Twitter use case. But, there's going to be, stores. There's going to be, like, people can trade stocks. People can do whatever they want on Nostr, right? I mean, it's pretty crazy. And then there is the aspect of the people sort of like monetizing their content, which is a whole other ballgame now, right? Because Nostr now makes the platform, right, the protocol open for people to not be demonetized, not be deplatformed. And, even outside of the controversial stuff, the more sort of like cookie cutter content that everybody wants to, whatever is the new rapper that's going to be out there, that, they want to have their content. And you have a place where they can take money directly, right, through the zaps. They can have, gift wraps for specific content they want to paywall. They can license automagically, right, some of their content, syndication, like syndicate on somebody else's feed. There's a lot in there, right? And we haven't even started to explore the design space, right, for some of these things.
Yeah.
Some of the aspects of the protocol, I think, hit above its weight class because, for example, it's already the case that like 98% of the like Bitcoin transactions I've ever made are zaps, just the sheer number. And, maybe not in terms of like total value, but in terms of total number, it just dwarfs the number of transactions I ever did before. Before I would do kind of token lightning transactions, occasional on-chain payments. I've historically used it more for the store of value aspects rather than solving a lot of payment problems. But with the kind of explosion of Nostr, my lightning usage just 100x'd. And I've even used it for tips, like zaps per se, where, for example, someone wants to pay me and I'm just like, well, give me a zap on Nostr, or I want to pay them and I just say like, hey, you want me to zap you on Nostr? The discoverability aspect, I think, is still not fully appreciated. A lot of people are still focused on the Twitter clone aspect. And whereas for me, as cool as the Twitter clones are, the fact that it makes wallets way more usable is already awesome because there's already a dense enough social graph in the Bitcoin space that's actually useful already. And even though the social graph of like the social media aspect is still relatively small compared to what's out there.
I recorded another episode via Jeff, Pablo, and we were talking about this aspect where, the public square is very important because that's where you advertise whatever thing, right? And then you draw from there. So it's both very important to sort of like explore, discover, and improve. But at the same time, it's sort of like there's all these other things, right? But it's the synergy between, I hate that word. I feel like that guy in that movie. Synergy.
You're a VC now.
That's right. Look at me. I'm a VC now, right? No, I am not.
How can you help?
That's right. This is not a self-help group for VCs, guys. So this idea of, you create these other tools in the same protocol, this other markets, these other network type things. And then you create an event that advertises. So like, you create like, I wrote a long form post. Maybe it's behind a paywall, maybe it's not. But like, and then you advertise it on Kind One, on the Twitter public square. I create something. Like, here's my post. Go read it there, right? Like, or I have some stuff that I'm selling. Like you go look there. Max, you wanted to...
Well, yeah, I think I just wanted to, riff a bit on where Nostr is going with this open identity and open social graph. Because I want to be clear, I think I made it sound when I was first speaking that, it's going to be a long slog and I sound kind of bearish there. But I actually want to say I'm extremely bullish. In fact, to the point where, so with my fund, HiveMind Ventures, of my last, I think probably 8 or so deals, like all are Nostr. I've invested in about 10 companies that are primarily focused on using Nostr in some way, shape, or form. And I'm betting the farm on this. And I want to be clear, like to the point where I even am like a little bored with Bitcoin stuff at this point and going all in on Nostr. And the reason is I actually see Nostr as a much, 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 much bigger, more interesting opportunity. Like, yes, obviously we all know Bitcoin's going to be the dominant money. We get it, 21 mil, all the good things. Great, buy some, hold it, all the stuff. But like, I actually do agree, with Odell's point that Nostr could bring Bitcoin to far more people than the other way around. I think that's an interesting topic. Perhaps we should debate that. But what really gets me excited is two things. The foundations of the protocol and seeing the new opportunities it enables. So I started to really bet the farm on this in, I guess it was 2 years ago in January, right after things blew up with Jack, getting everyone on board. And when I started really diving into it, and I looked in a few months earlier, Super Testnet, Fiat Jaff, BinArc from Ellen Bits, a lot of these, projects that a lot of these anons or whatever that I think are really, really good, they were all betting the farm on this early as well. And I thought, okay, there's something going on here. And the deeper I looked in the protocol, it was kind of like when I finally had Bitcoin click for me. I realized the fundamentals are such that if you want a permissionless identity system and an open protocol for sharing data and building a social graph, I don't think you can do anything better, right? Like you can't get simpler than Nostr. Having something with, 7 fields of pure JSON, and oh, by the way I create an identity, I can roll dice and basically create a Bitcoin key in the exact same permissionless fashion. Those two things, it's going to be really hard for anyone to build something simpler than that. So if you agree that that's about as simple of a protocol as we can get, and it already has a lot of adoption, then it seems to me if you think there's going to be sort of a permissionless identity system for the web, an open data transport layer, this is probably the best shot that we've got, at least in the foreseeable future. And so once I kind of understood those principles, like I did with Bitcoin, realizing, okay, it's going to be impossible or as close to impossible as possible for someone to build something better. Now it's time to start thinking about how does this scale? Yes, there are all kinds of deficiencies. We don't have the users and all those things, but those are all fixable problems. Getting the sort of basics of the protocol right, permissionless identity and transport, boom, that's already done. So then what I start thinking about is, okay, cool. From that stage, what are the new things that Nostr enables? So the social media stuff, I'm actually not a big social media guy. I mean, I think it's great that it exists, but I think what's interesting about social media is it's the water cooler that allows the nerds to gather and build together. Like one of the signals that I tracked really, really carefully is what percentage of these early users are technical and what percentage are actually building.
So you have a nerd counter.
Exactly, man. I literally view my job as like, can I sniff out the nerds with good taste? And are they congregating somewhere? And the answer is yes, they are. They're congregating right here. And so once you see that there's so many of these users, like, even when it was 20,000 weekly active users, today we're at something like 40, although it's probably much higher than that if you have a read count, much higher. But whatever that number is, how many of those folks are building something, right? And the answer is like a disproportionately higher number than what's on your Twitter and your Twitter feed. So anyways, so then you start thinking, okay, so you've got the builders, you have the foundations of a protocol that can give permissionless identity and data sort of transfer. Now, what does that enable that's new, right? And so that's what I started thinking about and get excited as an investor. Like in the same way that putting the New York Times online was cool, Twitter was the big thing, right? Same thing is going to happen here where, yeah, we've got social media and we've got Zaps and it's cool, but Elon's already added tipping with Bitcoin. In case you guys, I'm sure you guys have seen this. No. It's early, but like he can copy a lot of those features. That's fair. But the thing is, like, the way to beat him is to embrace what we have, which is different, right? Which is complete interoperability of data, the ability for anyone to permissionlessly plug in.
Yeah. So like Fiat Jaff had the best explanation to resolve, like, why is Nostr so good, right? Because it's a collection of websites. I know it sounds retarded.
I like that.
But that's what it is. Like, because like we were asking, right? So like, why is it that I cannot see all the replies when I post, right? We don't have a good answer for that. But the answer is because you can't, right? Like, you don't see your Twitter replies on Facebook, right? Just, you have to think about Facebook as a big relay. Twitter is another big relay, right? Like Instagram is another big relay. And there is no interactivity between any of them, but the content, the social graph is the same. Right.
Exactly.
And when you start like looking at this in the Nostr way, this stuff all sort of like starts to integrate, right? It's very easy. You look at Highlighter, right? Galaxy Brain, Pablo goes, it's like, I'm going to make this insane thing where you create a quote on this, you highlight something, and then you attach it to this other thing, and then you can see the responses. And then, like, by the way, that one really triggered a lot of Bitcoiners because they're starting to call it the Galaxy Brain Nostr thing, which is great. Bitcoin should be boring is the plumbing. The plumbing should be boring. There is no excitement about the sewer convention, right? I'm sure the sewer people are very into it, but it's not like, all over the TV every time the sewer price pumps or something. Anyways.
I mean, on this topic, I think it's important to say that to me, I'm obsessed with Bitcoin, right? Like my life is Bitcoin. I'm completely all in on Bitcoin to the point where it's past all in. So everything I think of comes from a Bitcoin perspective. And with this perspective on Nostr, like people saying the Nostr technology is interesting to me, but not the social aspect, is the same as saying I'm interested in blockchain, but not Bitcoin. The social aspect is what is bootstrapping everything. We are essentially shitposting our way to a global web of trust, to the ability to pay any of your friends you want anywhere in the world to use all these other apps. You need that social aspect. And to Lyn's point, I mean, at this point, I can pay any of my friends through Nostr through one simple trick. You alienate all the people that don't use Nostr, and then there you have your entire social graph. You're good to go.
But how do you really feel about it?
Well, I want to be clear. I love the social, right? Like I actually very much agree with you that is how we're bootstrapping this, and the social being brought to so many other things. So the identity piece that I was talking about, what does this enable that's new? This is the thing that I'm very obsessed with. MVK, you give the example of Highlighter, which is awesome. And like eventually that's going to be, kind of something like Rap Genius on steroids, which I'm excited about. I think the best, clearest example of this today, in addition to the payments and being able to, have your address book on your phone, is Fountain. Have you guys all tried Nostr mode and Fountain?
Yeah, we're there. We had a whole episode about Pod 2.0.
You're on a conversation with it's 3 professional podcasters here.
we are all podcasters. we are mission complete in the arc of Bitcoining.
Beautiful. Well, I don't know if you've seen this feature yet, but the feature that I love that gets me so excited is, someone was asking me. I've been sharing title tracks on Nostr. I love music. And Jeff G asked me, hey, sure would be cool if there was like a DVM or something that was able to basically just forget all of your social media posts. Like, I don't care what you're saying, but I want to hear what you're listening to. And I told him, dude, that's already live. If you go to Fountain right now, you can see feeds and sort not just by, audio, you can actually sort podcasts and music only. And anyone that's sharing a track today from Tidal, part of a public company, or Wavelake, incredible startup, you can see that whole feed there. And so to me, that's this incredible, like that is the aha moment for so many people when I say, look, imagine if everything you shared on Twitter, now I could just extract the music and create a playlist for you in Spotify, right? Like that is not possible in today's world.
Well, I was going to say, so I agree that the social element's really important, but I think what can help accelerate this is when these types of things start being possible that just aren't even possible on other platforms.
Exactly.
So we're not it's hard to out Twitter. I think it's possible, basically algorithm marketplaces and basically and then zaps and things like that. You can out Twitter, but you're going against a very big network effect. Whereas doing something that no one else is doing because you're making use of that underlying protocol, I think is powerful. And that's where we can get these kind of surprising upsurges that are maybe hard to predict ahead of time. Like what's going to be the killer app that reaches 1 million people first. I don't know. But I think that there's a really kind of fertile ground for a bunch of those that are just fundamentally better. One of the things I keep thinking about is review websites, because if I want to look up a hotel or a show or whatever the case may be, I look at reviews and I see the numbers, but it'd be really cool to have not just the numbers, but NVK reviewed this thing and shows people I know first, people in my social graph, did they review it or rate it or something?
And it's the real them.
It's the real them. It's verified to be them as far as the web of trust is concerned. And then you also see the numbers. So it's both qualitative, taste, and then quantitative. I think there's a million little things like that I I kind of, when I look at the rest of the space, that's what I look at. And with Bitcoin, one of the points I've made is that in addition to being software, it's also an idea. Like, it's basically people, it literally changes the language that people use around money. Like, people will literally describe like, the dollar system is only being one full node, for example. Like they kind of, they have now a model of like how money could work. And then they go and they describe other things differently. They change their language around that. And then they think, why should money have any supply inflation at all? Now that we see that it's possible to have a money that doesn't have that, it just changes expectations. So, and I think Nostr can be similar, which is that it can even impact other non-Nostr things because it reframes how we view other things. So for example, if Nostr gets really good at having like algorithm marketplaces and people start to say, well, why can't I do that on Twitter? Why can't I do that on Facebook? Or why can't, it could actually force other ecosystems to maybe eventually become Nostr integrated, but even before then to start kind of incorporating some of those aspects indirectly, because it changes our expectations of what social media should be compared to how it has been.
Yeah, I think like the biggest value that we have now is that we have glue. There was no glue between all the network graphs and how to interact between them, right? I mean, there's a million things on Nostr technically that triggers me deeply. Like, deeply. I mean, the DMs to Fiat Jeff are full of NVK's triggers. But what's fascinating is like, it's the same way Bitcoin was, right? Like Bitcoin triggered every single person in the money space, in the cryptography space, everywhere. Like, people hated it. So the people that came to Bitcoin were not the expected people. It's the same with Nostr. You have similar things. And one fascinating thing that Fiat Jeff did is he had JSON as sort of like the common carrier, which is atrocious. But any web dev can handle JSON, right? We're starting to hit some walls now, and maybe we're going to have a binary sort of optional way of handling some of that. Otherwise, we're not going to have speed. But aside from this technical babble, this idea of having a glue between things with real identities and signed events is a huge fucking deal, right? Like, it just was not possible before. I mean, Elon, as Matt would say, like, he captured the @America handle and he started tweeting from it, right? And what's fascinating is like, he could go on my account and say something, but he cannot go on my account and say something on Nostr because that's a signed event, right? And when you have signed things, people start putting more valuable things on them. Like before, we memed Bitcoin into existence. We're going to meme Nostr into existence. But it could be more than memes because it is signed and protected. It is mine. I made it. Right? That changes everything. I know it sounds sort of like, just like waving the hands, which I am right now for the people that are not watching, but it is how the network inherently works. That was not true for Mastodon, which saw, Mastodon, it's still probably 10x Nostr in terms of user count, and it's just a database. You don't own your identity, you don't own your content. If you use bitcoin.hackers.org, you would know that like it could be also tyrannical. And that's just the nature of those protocols. But anyways, the point is, going back to funding and finding economics, when you have property, right? Like you can affirm property, which is your signature on Nostr, and you have a medium of exchange that is also digital, shit changes, right? And now we can have more valuable things on the internet between two people and then use Bitcoin money to then exchange that value. I think this is like where we're going now.
And I would say, we don't even need to be so speciesist. The thing that gets me so excited about Nostr is not just between two people, but what about the agents? What about the bots, right? So as I start thinking about new use cases that Nostr is actually going to enable net new, I think there's two that I think could pop very soon that I'm very interested in finding. Like the fountain and all that stuff is cool. I think that's going to take time to grow. One is if we get a Bitcoin bull market, which I think a lot of us are, probably at least hoping for.
We hope so.
We hope so, right? Like, I think, Bitcoin by itself is incredible, but you needed Lightning or something like Lightning to help scale it and make it actual, transactable money. And I think that Bitcoin itself needs Nostr or something like Nostr if it's going to scale in a way that we all want it to, which means self-sovereign, right? And so I think that if we start seeing Bitcoin price pop, I think the things that I'm expecting for Nostr to really enable are, as you were talking about earlier, marketplaces. So peer-to-peer Bitcoin trading, local Bitcoins over Nostr with a shared order book, obviously that's going to be fucking big, and people are going to build shared order books on that. Then you're going to have, marketplaces for all the cashew mints, or if, whatever form of that ends up taking off, some kind of mint. You're going to have marketplaces for oracles, for things like DLCs. When we start having betting, like why is Polymarket still on ETH? Someone needs to build a version of that, which we can plug in, to the Bitcoin Lightning ecosystem. So I think all of that is a really fertile ground. If I was an entrepreneur looking for a short-term win, that's an area I would be exploring very deeply, because if, as you said, you're putting high-value items like Bitcoin out there, then as someone providing services around that marketplace, even if the order book is open, I can always take my cut, because, hey, we're dealing, if someone's trading, $10,000 through me and I take a 1% cut, no big deal. So that's one area that I would be looking very closely if I were an entrepreneur that I'm excited about. The other area is the AI stuff. I think everyone is asleep at the wheel at how big of a deal this thing is. Now, this is, I guess, where some of my San Francisco bias comes out. Like, I hear people feeling the AGI all around me. And, although I'm very skeptical of the word AGI itself, I do think artificial intelligence, of course, it's going to change the world. And I think there's two big ways that Nostr can ride on this trend. And I would be looking very, very carefully here if I were an entrepreneur. One, in the future, a pub key is your identity. Why does it have to be a human? In the future, where imagine we have a world where all the different services or whatever you want, those can all be strung together, maybe as data vending machines, DVMs, maybe as something else. But I think this is an extremely underexplored idea. And VK, you're one of the only guys exploring it, by the way. So let me know if you start going more in this direction. But this idea of, how do I have, I guess open agents is the closest thing playing with this today, but like an open marketplace where people can discover, mash together all kinds of agentic services. And oh, by the way, have one pub key that controls them all, controls the fleet. That's going to be a really big area of opportunity. And by the way, do you think JP Morgan is banking the AIs? Of course not. The second thing that I think is going to be really big coming out of AI is the other thing you were talking about, authenticity. As the web is already full of spam, I'm sure you guys know dead internet theory. Dead internet theory said the internet died, 6 years ago when it was just too much spam. And probably wasn't true then. It's definitely true today. And tomorrow, next year, how much more spam is going to be there from the AIs? I think we need a solution yesterday, whether it's a personal AI assistant or some kind of app that basically says, hey, I need to calculate everything that I'm reading. What is the Web of Trust score on this? Who can vouch for it? I'm to the point where if I don't see something signed on the internet, even when I saw the Trump assassination stuff, I was like, is this real? Is this fake? And I'm not saying that is. I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist, but I really don't believe anything.
Go for it.
Unless I see something right in front of my eyes, IRL, or signed by a key that I trust on Nostr, I don't trust it. And I think that's a big area of opportunity.
We made the Unleash.chat side hobby. It's the DVM stuff is there. Some people are using it now. It is extremely powerful, right? A great way of looking at it, especially if you're a Bitcoiner listening. Remember when Lightning messages were going to be the next thing? And, we figure out very fast that you don't want to put the message in the money because the money doesn't move as fast or is as scalable, right? Not a great idea. But this idea of making everything Nostr native is a big deal because Nostr communication is nearly free, right? Really it's just bandwidth constraint, but that's free. Right? So when you are sending and receiving things, why use the web? Right? You can just send everything through Nostr signed. So you can call a DVM and say, hey, translate this for me or give me a fart joke, right? And you can pay for that processing before or after, depending how you want to run things. The design space is ginormous, right? And you can monetize the things there, or you can sort of pass them along, right? You can create feeds, you can, do whatever you want. You can check authenticity of things as long as somebody has an agent model that can handle that. I think that the main issue with the AI stuff is that, it's like Nostr. It's very early. I know it's been happening since the 50s, AGI any day now.
2 weeks.
No,
2 weeks.
The best part is the AGI from LLMs. It's like saying we're going to make a great electrical engine from a gas engine, but that's a different conversation. The point is, again, more ways to monetize things, right? It's you have a medium now with a social graph to create value and charge for that value. If that's a direct payment or if that's an auxiliary way of getting paid, direct way of getting paid, I think it's the huge deal here.
Yeah, I do think that agents or data vending machines and all this types of stuff is going to be an increasingly big part, both in the positive and the negative. So basically, the web of trust and the signing element helps with the spam that is only going to increase from here. And then also these helpful agents and data vetting machines and things like that also can just do a lot of good. And I think when we get to the point where like right now you can already make like pictures and videos kind of quick with AI, but if we imagine it 10x better, people can make a photorealistic video with a simple prompt and then everything online is like a lie and it's very fast to generate. That becomes a really difficult social environment to navigate. And that's where web of trust and signing things is so important. I mean, even like I working on this like little crappy like hobby sci-fi novel, and like part of it is like I'm assuming that the internet's practically like unusable without signing in it because it doesn't seem that far away where like you have just floods. Like we already have bots, but like bots that are a little bit more Turing like test, like they pass the Turing test better, arguing for whatever the creator wants, like this country over this country, or this type of disinformation, or this type of marketing, or like just bots everywhere that seem like real people but they're not. And of course, online you don't really scrutinize things too much because it's just it's numbers. And I think that's the world we're headed to. And so you need both. You need tools to both defend against that and then also make use of it where they're sophisticated enough to be helpful.
Controversial opinion, uncontroversial opinion, we're going to find out. There is no spam in signed content. Like, it's seriously, like,
yeah.
Because once you have a web of trust, there is no spam. Right? I mean, nobody's going to take over your keys to start, like, trying to sell me, like heart medication or something, like, it's just, as long as you stay within your web of trust, you don't take a step into the fire hose because keys are free. There is no spam. It really is that simple. There is no fake content. I mean, it could be fake content that a friend of yours decides to post, right? Like he could make a funny video of like Trump in a convenience store of a gun, like we saw those great little AI videos. But that's deliberate, right? Like that's not like that is on a pub key that it's a known actor, right? And then, if he starts sharing that and saying that happened, I mean, that's a social concern of yours. It is not spam. I think the spam problem gets resolved. I mean, it really does. We should be depending on webs of trust. That's what we left behind in the old world, right? Like we had the Dunbar number, right? And we had proof of punch is what I like to call. It's like, if you have a contract to somebody, you know who to punch if they rug you. Like he wasn't doing 10 houses down in the village, right? Like you go to his house, you knock on the door, and you give him a good one, right? We lost that. And now with webs of trust of signed content, we can get back to some of that. You have your village, right? Maybe it's multiple villages, but it's more compatible with the human capacity of social graphs, right? It's not just like, here's what I have for you. And, like, it's like you look at Instagram, it's like, booty, like cooking videos, and like maybe you see your family on it, right? Like, it's like, sure, that's the algo.
Those are not mutually exclusive.
Right, sure. But, like, it is this extremely unhealthy existence, right? Like, these platforms are fighting you because the way that they make money is by, like, making you very angry and, and very horny to exist there, right? People should have like a certain like separation of concerns, right? And expect that their tools don't cheat them on them, right? And I actually see great ethical advertising coming to Nostr. I want to see that. There's nothing wrong with advertising. It's just we want ethical advertising, right? We want brands to organically get to you because of your friends, or as simple as like, hey, you want to use this relay? We have ads on it, and we push it on your feed, and like you might see some stuff there, and if you don't like it, like block it or whatever. But it's different because you have choice. You can choose to go to a different relay. You can choose to use a different client. You're not stuck. On Twitter, you're stuck. On Facebook, you're stuck, right? And if you decide to leave, you're leaving massive brand dollars. You're leaving your family in many cases, right? Like if you're in South America, without WhatsApp, you don't exist. You can't talk to your lawyer. You can't talk to a bank. You can't do anything. So like having that choice is going to enable much healthier ways of monetizing things.
I want to really, really focus on what you said there at the beginning, MBK, because I think you hit on something huge. This idea, and I wish we would see more people and perhaps people listening to this podcast experimenting with these two threads. The idea that a Nostr social client, like forget the like, oh, it's a way to earn zaps or whatever. This idea that this is the only social medium in the world where you can 100% verify the content you're getting is from a human or a bot. Like I could even see like creating an app that's like human or bot or something, somehow making kind of like fun of that. And maybe even kind of like joking it up to the next level. Like, I don't know if you guys saw, I forget the name of it, but someone just raised a pretty large round around the whole thesis of it's 100% bots, right? Like it's like you 100% bots. So I would be interested to see someone take this idea on two different directions on Nostr. One, the 100% humans, bots not allowed or whatever, play with the web of trust idea. Or two, take that idea that this other guy is playing with on steroids and be like, no, we're going to lean all the way in and we're going to allow bots to evolve without any rails, any guardrails, go crazy as they want, and they're going to have money, and it's going to be the wild fucking West. And that only is possible on Nostr with Bitcoin as well.
Westworld.
Yes. Westworld. That would be a great app right there. I think those two ideas are someone should play with those two.
I think another point I make sometimes is that Nostr has a lot of imperfections, but those imperfections are also where some of the monetization comes into play, which then builds up incentives. So you can't fix everything technically necessarily. You just have to good enough technical foundation, and then sometimes throwing money at a problem is what mitigates that problem. So for example, if a user wants better data availability, like if you want your content to have better reach or better, more of it stored and available, that's a money problem, right? That's something that if you're willing to economically incentivize entities to store and make available things you put out, that's a way of solving things. And I think that all the little pain points of Nostr, or at least a significant subset of those, are where some of the monetization fills in and what makes some of this kind of able to be like, venture backed.
Yeah, I mean, making the pain go away is like one of the oldest ways of creating a business, right? Like, it's like, here's a pain, here's a solution, I charge for the solution, pay me money. Like, it's not complicated. I love it. So guys, like, we're getting close to the hour mark here. What are you, we kind of talked a little bit about, like your forecast and stuff, but, like very short, like, what are you very sort of like bullish about in terms of like where we're going and some of the concerns you may have about the current state of Nostr? Lyn?
I think I'm bullish on the idea that we haven't even found the biggest use case yet, or that there's far more use cases than we could conceive of. And like the fact that I can just imagine things that are better than they are now, like a review site that again has quantitative metrics, but it also floats my web of like my social graph to the top. So I get that qualitative signal plus the quantitative signal. That just seems better than other review sites. And I think there's like a million little things like that. It's like, why not is this thing not a little better if Nostr's in it? Is how I look at it. I think that's for me what's super bullish. I'm not that worried about it being a very Bitcoiny culture at the moment because, network effects generally bootstrap from a small, like dense community before they spill out. And so while I do purposely try to put non-Bitcoin content on Nostr, I'll talk about Egypt, I'll talk about like random writing stuff, I'll post like music there, whatever the case may be, because I don't want it to be entirely self-referential, but I think that's totally fine at this stage to have that like dense little community of like everybody on Nostr talking about Bitcoin and Nostr. I think that's normal. That's part of the process. And for me, it's just like, there's obviously a lot of little pain points, but I think that at least most of those are solvable, either more development or eventually money.
Max?
I mean, look, to reiterate, I'm most bullish on Nostr of anything. I mean, I think that what makes me bullish with a long-term view is we have the opportunity to rebuild the entire internet, which is where I think we're headed on top of Nostr, and to potentially grow the size of that internet and the internet GDP by many orders of magnitude. Like what we're doing is we're bringing open and permissionless identity, data transfer, and free markets to the new country that is the internet. And together, Bitcoin, Lightning, and Nostr is the full stack, Bitcoin for money, Lightning for payments, Nostr for data and identity. I think people are going to be shocked if we're successful in this endeavor of how much larger the entire economy of the world can be. So that's what gets me bullish in the long run. In the short run, I would say, first of all, I want to echo, I definitely agree with Lyn. For businesses, solving a pain point or taking open source software, hosting it well, running a dedicated relay that has the highest availability and uptime. Like there's plenty of companies that have gone public just around taking open source software and just hosting it very well, right? Like providing service level agreements for stuff. Like I think that's a very promising avenue for a lot of entrepreneurs to explore. The ideas that I'll, I guess, leave the audience with that I personally am very excited. And if you're working on any of these, please hit me up. One, Nostr tools for Bitcoin financial services. I'll reiterate, local Bitcoins, marketplace for mints, marketplace for DLC oracles. I'm very bullish on that. Number two, I would love to see a lot more tooling specifically built out in Python for AI agents and AI, sort of being able to plug into modern day open source AI infrastructure in general. I think there's tons of fertile exploration. I would love to see DVMs accessible via Python. I want to see that soon. So if someone's playing with that, please let me know. Then the two big new categories of things I'm excited about are what I'll call the rise of the curator and the remix economy. For the rise of the curator, I think one of the killer ideas for Nostr is going to be, how do you get a new kind of economic activity paid, right? Everything on the internet, how do you get someone paid, made, or laid? And what I'm interested in here is, if I have really good taste in music or art or code or whatever, how can I get paid to curate that? I think you're starting to see a little bit of this in some of the value for value land with some of the podcasts that take tracks from Wavelake and then you can listen to them on Fountain, and the splits get sort of split between the DJ and the artist. I think that's very interesting. There's going to be a lot of fertile ground. And then the remix economy, which is kind of built around this. I think the best example I've seen is Stemster. Shout out to that project. It appears to be dormant, but the code is open, so someone should take this and run with it. Stemster for everything. Anyone having the ability to take a piece of creative content, whether it's code, music, art, writing, take it, remix it, and then grow the entire pie or the entire value waterfall of everyone that's ever shared a derivative of that, I think that's going to be absolutely massive. And it's only possible on Nostr because, going back to something Odell said at the very beginning, Facebook's limited to however many billions of users they have. You're never going to get over that. In this world, you can literally share that content freely to anyone, potentially any agent that may want to consume it in the future without any restrictions because it's open.
Odell, I don't think anybody has aped into Nostr harder than you have this last year. So listen, why don't you have the final word and drive this home?
Well, first off, your question was pain points. Our two biggest pain points in Nostr right now are DMs. We need to fix DMs, and we're going to fix DMs. But right now,
just kill the DMs for now.
They're unusable. I refuse to use them. People cannot see my metadata. I do not want people to see my metadata of who I'm chatting with and when they're chatting. And when we are chatting, the frequency, and we will fix that. Jeff's doing a lot of good work on that, and he is on an OpenSats grant right now. The second piece, it was DMs, and just using a single bare private key for your entire identity. I think there's been too much focus on key rotation. That's an incredibly difficult problem to solve. I mean, I think when we start to see sovereign states, when we start to see presidents of countries and stuff use this as public comms, they'll be using it in some kind of multi-sig fashion, whether that's with hardware signers or whether that's with something like Frost. I think that's the direction we go to solve this, is that if it's a high value account, if it's a company, if it's a country, something like that, it will be multi-sig. And then last but not least, like for the final word, I would say, I want to put to rest this idea that Nostr is a Twitter clone. It's already way more powerful than Twitter. And it's already way more scalable than Twitter. Twitter cannot scale the way Nostr can. And Twitter cannot compete. X cannot compete with Nostr for the same reason that PayPal cannot compete with Bitcoin. PayPal doesn't suck because PayPal wants to suck. PayPal sucks because they're incredibly centralized and they're hamstrung by regulations and the environment that we live in. And the same will be true with Facebook and Twitter trying to compete with Nostr.
Yeah. Listen, guys, this was amazing. I'm super grateful you guys were willing to give us an hour of your time. I just want to add that there's going to be a bounty coming out for Frost, for Nostr keys on Frost. And who knows, maybe that might even drive Bitcoin's Frost's solutions like forward faster, which is super cool. Pablo's writing, Ahrefs going to release it. There is an MLS episode of Jeff. We're talking about private groups, proper privacy on DMs and things like that. So we recorded an episode on that. And man, super bullish. I think we all sort of feel the same way. And it doesn't have the Kool-Aid vibe, which is great. Appreciate it. Thank you so much. There'll be more episodes. We're not done. And I don't know in which order we're releasing things either, so I can't make any comments to that. But to the people who binge watching this and it's been a few hours, good on you for keep on going. And there's going to be a topic for everyone, probably more than one topic for everyone. It is a pleasure and an honor to be part of this. Thank you so much, guys.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. This was fun.
Thanks for listening. For more resources, check the show notes. We put a lot of effort into them. And remember, we don't have a crystal ball, so let us know about your project. Visit bitcoin.review to find out how to get in touch.